Object modeling techniques. Okay, this is also called as OMT. Okay, so we know that model can be defined as an abstraction of something before an actual thing is being developed. Okay, so model would always give you an outlay or the structure, and it would give you a visualization how your thing which would be developed would look like. Okay, so in this we'll see how the objects can be related to each other and how it can be defined and what all operations can be performed on it. So, in object modeling technique, three models were proposed, okay, by three scientists or researchers we can call. So, the name of those techniques are, the first one is Rambach OMT, okay. The second one is Booch technique or OMT, BOOCH OMT, and the third one is Jacobson OOSE. Now, what's this? We'll see these things in details. Okay, so first I'll start with the Rambach OMT. So we call it the Rambach OMT. So it was proposed in 1991. Okay, so the Rambach technique was designed or it was proposed in 1991, and the purpose of modeling, according to the Rambach, was testing physical entities before building them. Okay, that is about the simulation, then having a communication with the customers, then having visualization, that is the giving presentation, that means the giving details about the projects that we would be working on, what would be the layout and how it would be started and carried forward, and the reduction of the complexity. These were the four purposes of proposing this Rambach OMT. So I'll just write here the purpose of modeling according to Rambach. Okay. RAUM, I missed the U. Okay. So the first purpose was testing physical entities before building them. Okay. The second purpose was communication with customers, visualization. Okay, that means alternative presentation of the information. We can say that. I'll just write alternative presentation of information and reduction of complexity. Okay, so these were few purpose Rambach OMT. Okay, so when Rambach proposed the modeling technique, so he was having few points in his mind that these points should be considered, and for proposing this modeling technique would help us in framing out the project in a better way. Okay, so he wanted to test the physical entities before building them. That means the simulation, how they can be implemented. That things should be considered. Second, he wanted that a proper communication would have been carried out with the customer so that all the required things are being gathered correctly and we have started in the correct direction. For that, communication with customers is required. Okay. Now the visualization means the layout. No doubt, we would be talking about the layout and the structure of the model. At the same time, having several presentations regarding which it would be regarding the information of the project working on, and at the same time, it would give us the information that what is the progress of the project which is being going on, how much work has been done, in which direction we are working, how much work is remaining, if there were any issues, what were the reasons for those issues, how those issues were solved, all those things. Okay. And the last was reduction of complexity. So if there is any problem, if occurrence of any problem, so how those things can be handled was the purpose of Rambach's modeling technique. Now Rambach has proposed three models to make these purpose uh, fulfill and make a technique in a better way. So he proposed three models. Object model, dynamic model, and functional model. Okay. So he has proposed these three models which would help us to design a better layout of the project. So let's discuss these object model, dynamic model, and functional model in detail. Okay, so let's talk about object model. Now, object model is usually represents the static and most stable phenomena in the model domain. Okay, so the main concepts in the object models are classes and association with attributes and the operations which will be performed. And in this model, the aggregation and generalization is also included along with the multiple inheritance. Okay, then only these relationships could be defined in a better way. Okay, so in object model they have determined the classes, and in the classes how those classes are associated, and how the attributes would be defined, and what would be the operations, what would be the responsibility, those would be clearly defined in object model.
Ma'am,
So, yes,
ma'am, is there background noise on your part?
what?
Ma'am, there's background noise. Is that on your part?
A background, yeah, already the two more lectures are going on. Just give me a minute. Okay, I have asked the faculties to speak louder because already two more classes are going on along with me. Okay, so there may be a noise. Okay, so object model represents static and stable phenomena of the modeled domain. I'll just write these points here. Represents the static and stable phenomena. Now, the main concepts are the classes and the association. So, in the object model, the main important thing for us are the classes and how associations among the attributes is taking place and what all operations are being performed. That is the main part in this. So, the main concept was classes and associations with attributes and operations. So after the OMT technique, I'll be teaching you about the representation of the classes, active classes, how their visibility, what is the use of plus, minus, hash and all, and association that I'll teach you. Okay, so this point would clear in that particular section. So just remember that Rambach has proposed three models. In that, he has focused on the object model, where he stated that it is a static. It defines about the static phenomena of the model, means it is static and stable, and it depicts about the phenomena, and at the same time it tells that how classes are being defined. Okay, the concept of the classes and associations with the attributes and phenomena, and at the same time it tells about the aggregation and generalization with multiple inheritance concepts. Okay, which helps us to define the relationship between different classes. So whenever we'll be designing or making a layout of object model, so these all points would help us to make an object model in a correct manner. Okay, so it would always have aggregation and generalization. Okay, with multiple inheritance are predefined relationships. Okay, so this was about object model. Now, what is dynamic model? Okay, remember this. We will be studying all these models in very detail. Okay, this is one of the OMT technique of object modeling technique. Now, in the further classes, we'll see how object model is designed, how dynamic model is designed, or how functional model is designed. Okay, so let's see about dynamic model. Okay, so dynamic, the name itself represents, or by the name we can understand that things are not stable, they are not static, they are changing. So in this, we would be talking about the state of the model, means the transaction. Before this transaction, what was the state, and after the transaction, what was the state of an object in the class. Okay, so dynamic model would always represent the state or the transactional view of the model. Okay, so it represents a state or transition view of model. Now in this, we would be talking about states, transition between states and events to trigger transitions. Okay, what was the reason? What was the event that has changed the state of a state from one to the another? How the transition took place. Okay, so these will be the main concepts behind the dynamic model. So the main concept would be main concepts are state, transition between state, transitions between state, and events. Okay, what were those events that triggered transition? Events to trigger transitions. Okay, now in these actions, there would be an action which would help us in making changes in the states of the model. Okay, so actions can be modeled as occurring with the states. Okay, so actions would always define, they would be correlated with the states, and action would help in changing the state. Okay, so actions can be modeled as occurring with states. See, for example, if I'll talk about a state diagram or a dynamic model, okay, so we are talking about the state is changing, transition is taking place. So, if I'll talk about an event, okay, for example, maybe switch on a light, okay, so the action would be when the switch is pressed, okay, or we can say when the power is on. Okay, so the light glows, transition from the state. Okay, first it was not glowing, then it started glowing. Then when the power is turned off, it stopped glowing. Okay, so how the states are changing. Okay, first it was off, then it was on, and when it was off, there was no activity, no action. When the action was performed, the state got changed. Transition of the state took place. Okay, so that would be done in dynamic model. Okay, now the next is functional model.
Ma'am,
Huh?
ma'am, could you explain the example once more?
Once more. Okay. देखो, as we are talking about the dynamic model, in dynamic model we represent the state and the transition. Okay, so I just took a very simple example from our daily life. We are talking about whether our light is glowing, whether the light is switched on or not, whether we are talking about it. Okay, so what would be the event and what would be the state? Okay, so the state is the light is not glowing. Okay, and here we have seen that when an action is performed, then only the state or the transition takes place. State changes from one form to another. So when the power is turned on, means the power is being supplied. That means the light is glowing. Okay, and when the power is turned off, the light stopped flowing. That is the state transition. Means when the action is performed, the state is changing, transition is taking place, and we can see the changes in the states, behavior of the states. Okay.
Yes, ma'am, got that.
Okay. So, see, we can say that transition is an instantaneous change from one state to the another. First, the state of the bulb was off, means the light was off, then it was glowing, means the transition in the status of the state. Okay, that can see. Don't worry. We'll be solving so many problems. That means we'll be designing so many. Diagrams related to these models, so all your doubts would be clear in that time. Okay, so I'll just move ahead with the next one, that is the functional diagram. Functional model. So it handles the process of the model corresponding about the data flow. Okay, so it would tell us in the functional model, we'll get a rough idea that how the data flow in this particular chart or the layout is being carried out. In this, the main concept is to define the process, to define the data store, and to define the data flow and the actors. Okay, so in functional model, we handle the process, or it defines the process in which the data flow is taking place. So we can see that it defines the process, how data flow is taking place. Okay. That means the main concept is process, data store, data flow, and actors. These would be the important components of the functional diagram. So these were the three models which was proposed by Rambagh in his object modeling technique, as he has four things in his mind, that physical testing of the entities should be done, communication with the customers, visualization, that means presentation, and to maintain the decrease the complexity of the project. Okay. So to overcome to make these all aim possible, he proposed three models which helped him to make object modeling technique a better technique to design models in descriptive, informative, and better data flow, better transition, better state definitions. Okay, so this was the work proposed by Ram. Now, the second OMT technique, okay, object modeling technique, was proposed by Booch, okay, Booch. Now let's see what he has to tell us about the modeling techniques. Okay. Now the next is so in this modeling technique, the main focus was on analysis. Okay, now he has split analysis into different parts. Okay, now what are those? He has said analysis with customer's requirement, and analysis about the domain. Okay, so he proposed a technique which would deal with analyzing the model, how model can be designed, and what all things would be required. So As we know, when we start, we always start with the analysis phase. In that, we deal with the customer. So his first step was to gather the requirements from the customer's perspective, and this analysis step generates a high level description of the system, its functions and structure. Okay, so whenever we deal with the customer, it would help us to identify the system functions and the structures, and would give a description. Okay, we'll get an idea what is the purpose of designing this particular project, and what is the idea behind this. Okay, so the customer requirement step is the important one in Booch OMT, which would give us the information required to proceed, and the requirements of the customer, what he wants, what he actually wants from us. Okay, now what is domain analysis? Now in this we try to define about the objects, classes, their attributes, inheritance and the methods, and how the state transition would be taken place, how state diagram for the objects can be established. Those all things would be included in domain analysis. Okay, so and one more thing, in the analysis phase, validation is also done, whether the object's transition, whether the state transition was taken properly or not. So validation plays an important role, and in analysis phase, it goes on again. See, the analysis phase would not, we cannot say the we had a communication with the customer and it was over. No, it would be iterated. It would be conducted again and again to see whether the customer's requirement is getting fulfilled or not, whether the model which is being designed, which is being worked upon, is correctly designed or not. Okay, so once the analysis phase is completed, the Bush methodology develops the architecture in the design phase. Okay, so this is the whole idea of the Bush OMT. Its main purpose is to have an analysis that is with the customer detail communication, gather all the requirements, define about, then in the domain phase, we define about the classes, objects, their in association, inheritance, validations, and everything. And this analysis phase will go on and on and on, means iterations would be carried out again and again until and unless all the requirement from the customer has been gathered and it has been made sure that everything is going in a perfect. Okay, so that is the main. And when the analysis phase is completed, then both methodology would define an architecture, would give design or layout of the whole project to be done. But at the same time, it has drawback. That is, it concentrates on analysis and design phase. It does not consider about the implementation or the testing. Okay, so it mainly focuses how should be the representation, how the class code should be defined, what should be the about the object, how the attributes, operations, responsibilities, everything. But it never thought about the implementation part. Okay, we are making the layout, but whether these things would be practically possible or not, that is not considered in the Booch OMT technique. Okay, so in short, we can say that it would just give us the layout, it would just give us the idea what is the demand of the customer, okay, what would be the classes and the objects, but how we would implement them practically, that would not be described in the Bosch model. Okay, so I'll write the drawback of that. Okay, it has a drawback that it only concentrates on on analysis and design. And does not concentrate on or does not consider the implementation or testing phase. Now, the next one is Jacobson OOS. Now, OOSC stands for Object Oriented Software Engineering. It is a software design technique that is used in software design in object-oriented programming. So we can say that it is one of the software designing technique which is used for software designing in OOP, that is object-oriented programming. Technique to design a software. Used in object-oriented programming. Now, it was developed in 1992 by Ivor Jason. Sorry, Jacobson. Okay. In this, we can say that OOSE is the first object-oriented design methodology that employs use case in software design. Okay, so Jacobson was the first who proposed in object modeling technique about the use cases, how use cases could be helpful in software designing. So he proposed this this designing techniques to consider use cases in software design. Okay, so the OOSC is the first object oriented design technology that used use cases in software design. Okay, now it includes requirements analysis, design, and implementation and testing. So, Jacobson has included all the parameters which are required to make a model complete. Okay, so he has included the requirements. Okay, so it includes requirements, what then analysis, okay, design, implementation, testing the model. Okay, so these were the three techniques which would help you to design an object model. Okay, so the first one was Rambach, who has proposed three models, that is the object model, dynamic model, and the functional model. Second was the Booch OMT, who has emphasizes on analysis, that is the customer requirements and the domain analysis. And the third one was Jacobson Ous, who has proposed about the use cases in the software designing, and he has included requirements which are being gathered, then analysis about them, then the designing techniques, implementation, and the testing. So these were the three OMT techniques. Okay, now as I said, today I'll be showing you a few representation about the class and their visibility, active and all. So I'll just discuss because these representations should be known by you, as we would be in the practical classes, we would be designing various models. We would learn how a class can be defined, attributes and all. So I'll just give a layout, then we can discuss these things in more detail. Okay, so just pay attention in the representation. So I'll be just giving you a representation about the class and association. Okay. Okay, so let's discuss about representation symbols. Okay, so the first one would be class. Now, how class would be represented? Okay, in an diagram. So class is always represented by a rectangular box. Okay, the rectangle would be like this. Okay, now on the top would be always class name. Okay, the next would be attributes, operations, responsibility. Okay, now the division of the roles is uneven, so don't think that the responsibility is having more space. It's not like that. Okay, so this is the representation of the class. Now what things you have to keep in mind, that the class name, this would be always in center, and this would be always in bold. That's why I've written in bold. Okay, it would be of always center aligned and always bold. And attribute, operation, and responsibility. Okay, these would be always left aligned. Okay, and they would be not bold. Okay, now classes would be of two types. One would be active class, and one would be passive class. Okay, now what is active class and what is passive class? Active class would always initiate and control the flow of activity. Okay, and what would be the work of passive class? It would always store data and would serve other classes. Okay, So it would always initiate and control flow of activities. And this would always store data and serve other classes. Okay, now there is one more thing which is important about class is visibility. That means to make the class access means who all can access the information contained in the class. Okay, so the next important parameter about the class is its visibility. Used to signify who can access information contained within class. Okay. Let's see what are those markers. We usually call them visibility markers. Okay, so I'll just make a class. So this is a class. In this class, we'll have a class name which should be written in bold. Class name. Now this class would have some attributes and now in many of the diagrams you would have seen this plus minus hash. Okay, so plus means public operations, minus would be private, and protected. Okay, so these are few markers. Okay, we call them markers. So these are few markers which defines who all can access the information contained in that particular class. So this is all about today's class. The remaining things I'll be explaining in the next class. Okay. So just keep these notations, these symbols in your mind. So when we'll be designing the diagrams, this would help us to define the classes, their operations, and attributes. So today we have discussed about the three techniques and three models which were proposed by one of the person, that is Rambam. Okay, so I'll share this content with you, and if you have any doubt, you can ask me any doubt.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
ma'am, in the first lecture you were saying something about projects. Is that the same thing?
See, that day one of the student asked me whether we have to make any projects or not. So it is up to you. That day also I said the same thing, and today also I'll say the same thing. If you want to, if you students want to work on something, you are free to do that because we'll be studying about so many designing techniques, so many designing methods. So these would help you in implementation, and at the same time you can at the end of the session you can come up with some working projects. So it is up to you. I'm not imposing anything.
So if we make something we have doubt, we can ask.
Yeah, you are
That
free to ask me anytime. I am always available for that. Okay.
okay, ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, ma'am.
So let me. Yeah.
Ma'am,
Yeah.
ma'am, can you explain the link thing of last lecture?
क्या link? Okay.
Link.
Okay. Okay, so link is the connection. Okay, Prajwal, link would define how the connections between the objects are being defined, how the connection between the objects has been established, and how they are interacting with each other. Okay, so it would just show how different objects are collaborating with each other. It represents the connection through which an object collaborates with other object. एक object दूसरे object से कैसे collaborate कर रहा है, that is the work of link. Okay.
Ma'am, it is the design thing or implementation thing, like matlab it's abstract thing for modeling, or it's
देखो,
like
right now I'm talking about modeling, or if you remember, it was few terms which are important in object oriented modeling. तो लिंक डिफाइन करे, देखो जो भी हम डायग्रामेटिकली बनाएंगे ना, that is for sure we are aiming for implementation, क्योंकि जो भी लेआउट मैं बना रही हूँ आई वांट इट टू इम्प्लीमेंट इट. तो जो स्ट्रक्चर मेरे सामने होगा अकॉर्डिंग टू दैट आई विल बी परफॉर्मिंग वर्क. ओके, सो आप
yes,
इसको.
ma'am, got that.
Okay, okay, okay.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, so I have downloaded the attendance. If anyone has doubt, can ask me. Else, you can leave the class. Thank you for being in the session.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Welcome.